What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix. I'm Ryan Coop here with your first CFL news roundup of the offseason. Happy New Year, everybody. Happy 2022. Kicking off the offseason content here for the year with recapping all of the latest news from around the CFL in the past month or so since the season ended. There's been a flurry of activity, especially in the last week or so, and there will only be more as we head towards free agency a month from today on February 8th. Should be lots of fun around that. I'm here to recap everything today from around the CFL in the past number of weeks. We're going to do this every 2 weeks here in the off season with some other content sprinkled in between on the off weeks there. Go back, check out a couple videos ago at an off-season plans update. You can see what I have planned for all of that. Let's dive right in. Let's go team by team and take a look at what the 9 teams around the CFL have been up to since the Grey Cup on December 12th. Let's go alphabetically here. Start off with the BC Lions. They kicked off their off-season by re-signing a number of their national players. Fullbacks David Mackey, Mario Villamizar, and wide receivers Jacob Scarfoni, Marcus Davis, defense backs Jamie Harry and O'Shane Samuels, all getting re-signed there by the Lions. I think those are a couple of good depth plays there. You know, David Mackey is a team captain, 3 seasons with the Lions, played 14 games in 2021. I think you've got a couple other guys that have played, a season or 2 there with BC and are going to continue to grow with the Lions. So nice to see them sticking around with the same team. The next day, the Lions promoted defensive backs coach Ryan Phillips to defensive coordinator. So they do have their defensive coordinator locked in for 2022 and have also rounded out the rest of their assistant coaches. Don Yanowski, the special teams coordinator, Travis Brown, the linebackers coach, offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach is Jordan Maxmit, offensive line coach Kelly Bates, wide receiver coach Jason Tucker, and offensive assistant Tristan Dice, who is the son of Bob Dice, I believe, offensive line coach of the Ottawa Red Blacks. They continued from there, focusing on the offensive line. 5 offensive linemen signed on December 16th. David Kneville, Andrew Pearson, Matt Government, Tyler Packer, and Jesse Lawson. Kneville and Pearson, the 2 most notable. They're both playing all 14 games in 2021. Kneville, it was his 3rd season with the Lions. Then a couple days off for BC from there. About a week later, we get some more activity continuing in the front office side of things, promoting Ryan Rigmaiden, who was the director of U.S. Scouting, to the assistant GM and director of player personnel. So a nice promotion for him. Congratulations. And then the next day, locking up punter Stefan Flintoff to a contract extension. He was the Lions nominee for most outstanding special teams player in 2021 and will be back handling punt return duties this coming season. Some more moves on the offensive line. Offensive lineman Suk Chung, a national, re-signed also by BC already, was the 2015 second overall pick by Winnipeg, played 14 games with BC in 2021, and has played in 91 career CFL games. So barring injury, we should see him hit the 100-game mark in this coming season. Also locking up offensive lineman Phil Norman, who spent time on the practice roster in 2021, his 4th season with BC. Only 1 game last season, but 13 games in 2019 for him. And then some big pieces here locking up. Wide receiver Dominic Rhymes played 8 games in 2021. 28 receptions, 411 yards, 1 touchdown, former 1,000-yard receiver with the Ottawa Red Blacks. Rhymes, I thought, had a pretty slow start to the season, but then ended up, when he came back from injury, was one of the top performers in that offense. So excited to see what he does this coming season. Linebacker Isaiah Guzlik-Messam also re-signed, 2018 4th-round pick, 12 games in 2021. And in 40 games over the last 3 years, he's piled up 37 tackles on defense, 24 on special teams, and 1 sack. So some nice pickups there. And then rounding out the moves for the Lions, December 31st, 2021, extending long snapper Tanner Dahl, who played 14 games in the last season, which was his 3rd season with BC, 58 career games played for him. And defensive back Hakeem Johnson, 2019 4th-round pick, played 14 games in his 2nd season with the Lions with 12 defensive tackles and 1 interception. So not a bad start to the offseason for BC. They've got kind of their personnel in place. Now they can kind of focus on the players on the field, and I think they've got some good pieces there, shoring up some of that offensive line, locking up some of those players like Dominic Rhymes, Stephen Flintoft. I think that's a good start to the offseason here for BC. Moving on to the Calgary Stampeders, they've been busy so far this offseason as well, starting off with a big name re-signing of defensive back Trey Roberson to a 2-year contract extension. He was one of the best defensive backs in the CFL in 2019, ended up going off to the NFL, but came back late season to Calgary and is now sticking around for 2 more years. I think that's huge to get a 2-year contract extension there. It's great to see. He tried the NFL, he didn't, he stuck around for a bit, but now back in the CFL and being committed to the Stampeders. You like to see that. They signed a number of depth players, quite a few of them. I'm not going to go through all of them. A number of guys that spent time on their practice roster, a couple guys, that were around the NFL as well. Probably most notable on the list is defensive lineman Uric Bethune. 7 games in 2021 with Calgary, 2 defensive tackles, 5 special teams tackles, and a sack there. Then they did some work this offseason on the quarterback position, extending quarterback Jake Mayer. He was the backup last season, played in 11 games, got 3 starts. In the time he played, 95 of 148, 1,211 yards, 5 touchdowns, 3 interceptions for Jake Mayer. Was the first player in CFL history to hit 300-plus yards in his first 3 starts. I'm really excited to see him sticking around here in Calgary for another season. Who better to learn from than the likes of Dave Dickinson and Bo Levi Mitchell? And speaking of Bo Levi Mitchell, he just most recently, just yesterday at this point, agreed to a restructured contract for 2022, which is the final year of his 4-year deal with Calgary. I'm assuming, his contract he signed was a very high-priced one back when he signed it 4 years ago. Last season obviously did not go as they planned. A down year for him, one of the worst of his career, unfortunately. Some injury troubles definitely led into that. So a bit of restructuring of his contract, I imagine making a considerable amount less here, which lets them keep the likes of Jake Mayer on the roster as well. I'm very intrigued to see what this pairing looks like for 2022. Bo presumably will be the starter. Mayer will be the backup, but will we see maybe, if Bo struggles, them more likely to move into Mayer's direction? I'm thinking Bo plays most games, Mayer, gets some more experience as backup, and then perhaps takes a starting role either in Calgary or elsewhere in 2023. The Stampeders also re-signed offensive lineman Julian Good-Jones to a 2-year contract extension. 2021 was his rookie season. He had 7 starts. And signed defensive lineman Alan Pay, 2nd-round pick by Edmonton in 2020. Played 1 game with the Elks, but then got injured and then ended up finishing the season on the practice roster. They had signed another quarterback to the roster by the name of Tommy Stevens, an American 7th-round pick by the New Orleans Saints in the NFL in 2020. Spent a bit of time on NFL rosters with Carolina and the Giants, and ended up playing 1 game with the Panthers in 2020. And now, knowing quarterbacks and Calgary's history, I set the timer now. Remind me in 2-3 years when this guy becomes a CFL All-Star, because Calgary always finds a way to find the next best quarterbacks in the CFL. Also continuing the moves for Calgary, defensive lineman Folarin Oremolade re-signed on January 5th. 7 games, 4 starts in 2021. 8 defensive tackles, 1 for a loss, 1 special teams tackle, and 2 sacks for him there. He missed the entire 2019 season with a quadriceps injury, so good to see him be able to get back to playing football after his injury, and we'll see what he can do in 2022. And then one of the biggest signings so far of the offseason, I think, wide receiver Reggie Begelton re-signing for a 1-year extension with Calgary. Much like Trey Roberson, fantastic 2019, best receiver, one of the best receivers in the league. Brandon Banks probably takes the top nod, but Begelton was right there. Ended up going to the NFL, stuck around a little bit there, but then ended up late season coming back to Calgary and made some big impacts in the 3 games he played. A couple over 100 yards. I know fantasy-wise he had a massive, I think, 28-point performance in his first game back. So this is a huge piece for them to bring back as kind of the leader in that wide receiver group alongside Kamar Jordan for the 2022 season. Happy to see that from Reggie Begelton. Then we move on to the Edmonton Elks. They started their offseason by re-signing a number of guys, including defensive back Aaron Grimes, who re-signed for 2 years. That's a nice extension there for Edmonton to get done. Also re-signing 4 others. Wide receiver Diego Villamontes was the first overall pick in the 2019 CFL LFA draft and signed a 2-year extension. Another global player, Thibaut Debaye, 3-year extension. He played 3 games in 2021. And then offensive lineman Peter Cordes and offensive lineman Emmanuel McGirt also signing 3-year contract extensions. So a couple longer contracts here. You love to see that from players in the CFL. Then the big shock waves came of Edmonton to really be the highlight of the offseason so far. We have a new general manager and a new head coach, and it is none other than Chris Jones. Jones was previously with the Elks, led them to a championship in 2015, and then ended up, going to Saskatchewan, took over manager and coaching roles there. Then ended up going, I think, off to the NFL. Then ended up coaching a high school team, I believe it was, before all of a sudden coming back to the CFL this year as a defensive assistant with the Toronto Argonauts. And, we all saw this coming at one point or another. No surprise here to see him back as the coach and manager in Edmonton, especially, they're still paying 2 guys, Sunderland and Elizondo, on the coach's cap, so you probably can't hire 2 separate guys. Makes sense to me that Jones comes back, and we'll see how long he sticks around this time. I know he said in his press conference he's staying around for the full 4 years I believe he's signed for. Let's wait and see. I like it as a short-term solution. He's going to make this team bring it back to competitive levels real quick. I am just a little bit concerned about the long-term situation with him in charge. Also adding to his staff, he has added G. Roy Simon as the assistant general manager, a great pickup there, CFL legend. Was part, his playing career, fantastic. After that, he's been a part of the BC front office since 2015. Was most recently the director of global scouting and U.S. regional scouting for them. So not a bad piece to add to the front office there for Edmonton from BC. And Chris Jones got to pretty quick work with, reshaping up what's to come for the team. This is going to be, I think, an offseason of change for them. And he kicked it off by releasing 11 players. Long snapper Martin Bedard, defensive lineman Chris Kasher, offensive lineman Derek Dennis, who did not play for them in 2021, but they would not release him from his contract and allow him to sign anywhere else. So finally, good to see Derek Dennis be freed. Wide receiver Armonte Edwards, ended up, go back, watch the last video, ended up being one of the biggest fantasy disappointments at the receiver position. So much hype, former 1,000-yard receiver, a couple seasons, 900 yards, just didn't work out in Edmonton. He has been released. Wide receiver Ernest Edwards also let go. Defensive back Afolabi Laguda. Offensive lineman Sir Vincent Rogers. Defensive back Jonathan Rose. Fullback James Tuck. Defensive back Herb Waters. And running back kick returner Terry Williams. So a couple big names there being released by the Elks as they kick off their offseason. They did re-sign a couple others. Wide receiver Danny Vandervoort had that big game late in the season where he ended up with 2 touchdowns, 3 receptions, 54 yards. Played 13 games with the Elks in 2021 after 3 seasons in BC. Josh Woodman also getting a 1-year contract extension at defensive back. 35 defensive tackles, 17 special teams in 49 CFL games. Had a previous stint with Edmonton, then went to BC, now back in Edmonton for a second straight season. Long snapper Zachary Greenberg also getting a 2-year contract from the Elks. Spent time with both Montreal and Ottawa in 2021. And that is not all. There's still more news to come from Edmonton. Offensive lineman David Foucault has been signed to a contract. Defensive back Mike Dubison and kicker Greg Hutchins. Foucault, 13 games with Montreal in 2021, played 3 seasons in BC before that. Dubison, last in the CFL in 2017, previously spent 3 years with Edmonton from 2014 to 2016, which was in the Chris Jones range. And then Greg Hutchins was on the Elks practice roster in 2019. Also then ended up signing with BC. Never really got some playing time in the CFL. They announced the remainder of their coaching staff. Offensive coordinator Stephen McAdoo, pass game coordinator quarterbacks coach Jarius Jackson, run game coordinator and receivers coach Marcus Howell. And those are the 3 additions there. McAdoo and Jackson both were with Jones in Edmonton in 2015, so he's sticking with the guys he knows and he was successful with. And all 3 were with Toronto in 2021, so some familiarity there, bringing pieces back with him by Chris Jones here. And finally, most recent news, just a couple days ago, extending global linebacker Maxime Royer for 2 years. Only 1 game in 2021 due to a toe injury, but 17 games in 2019. And releasing defensive lineman Chris Nelson, who played 4 games, had 6 defensive tackles in 2021. We move over to Hamilton, where we don't really have much to talk about in terms of on-field changes because they have really not announced any yet. But in terms of personnel, the big news, Ticats promoting head coach Orlando Steinauer to president of football operations and still retaining his head coaching role. There's a lot of speculation coming in, in the final weeks of the season there that Steinauer was going to leave to go, I think, take a university coaching job. He's sticking around and taking on an even greater role, and it's really great to see, I think. Great guy, great football mind, and excited to see what he does with this team. Of course, they did lose one of their top personnel guys in Sean Burke, who goes over to Ottawa, as we'll get to in a second. And they also did lose Jeff Reinbold, who goes over to Montreal, as we'll also get to in a second. But the rest of their football operations staff for the year, Steinauer, we've talked about him, Drew Alamang, assistant GM, director of Canadian Scouting, Spencer Zimmerman, assistant GM and director of player personnel. Bringing in Ed Hervey, who spent some time, was a former general manager with Edmonton, and I want to say he ended up going over to BC. I could be wrong on that one. Assistant GM, senior advisor to the president of football operations, aka Orlando Steinauer. So it's a nice pickup there. Rich Mazzaro, also assistant director of player personnel and football operations. So pretty good staff here to make the lead decisions for the Ticats for this season. Also, the Hamilton Tiger Cats and Hamilton Forge FC announcing the creation of the Hamilton Sports Group with the chair of the group, Bob Young, who has been involved with Ticats in a while. A lot of the same pieces from the Ticats and now just excited to see what this means for the growth of the Ticats, for Jeff C., and the sports in Hamilton. Moving over to Montreal, they started off the offseason by letting go special teams coordinator Mickey Donovan, who, if we jump ahead a little bit, just as of yesterday, has now been replaced by the aforementioned Jeff Reinbold, who did end up leaving the Ticats, signs with Montreal. Previously was the Als defensive coordinator in 2012. He spent 16 seasons in the CFL. Was the special teams coordinator most recently with the Ticats in 2019 and 2021. This is a great pickup, I think, for Montreal. He is a fantastic special teams coordinator. I think that's a position where they struggled at times this past season. In terms of the return game, they never really had a consistent presence dominating the return game. I know there were a bunch of injuries here and there, but I do like the move to bring in Reinbold to help out that area. The Als, Lockett continued going back to the start of the offseason, continued with some big extensions. Quarterback Vernon Adams Jr. and wide receiver Eugene Lewis, two of the biggest name pieces on this team, extended for this next season. Great to see them locking in for new deals very early in the winter. They also, locked up a couple other guys. Offensive lineman David Brown had 3 starts, played 10 games with Montreal in 2021. And defensive back Najee Murray, both of them signing 2-year extensions. Murray had 10 games, 3 interceptions, 1 touchdown, 26 tackles, and 4 knockdowns this past season. With the extension of Vernon Adams Jr., you knew only one of these two was going to be sticking around. You can't probably pay them both. So quarterback Trevor Harris has been released. Ended up getting traded to Montreal late in the season. Played 4 games there, 703 yards, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions for Trevor Harris. And we'll see where he goes this offseason, if he can get a starting job still somewhere else, or if he ends up taking a backup role somewhere. We'll get into that on a separate video, I think, kind of how we think the quarterbacks are going to shape out around the league. I previously mentioned, David Foucault signing a contract with the Elks. He was let go by Montreal as well. They also released their receivers coach, Robert Gordon, who joined the team in 2019, and added some additional people to the front office as well. Jean-Marc Edmé, as the director of pro personnel. I believe he previously spent time with Montreal. I'm getting all my teams mixed up. And then Pierre-Yves Laverne as the director of national scouting. Both were with Ottawa last season and now come over to Montreal. They've also named Anthony Calvillo, the great Anthony Calvillo, the legendary Anthony Calvillo, as their quarterbacks coach. Last time coaching in the CFL was the quarterbacks coach with the Argos in 2018, also coached with the Alouettes from 2015 to 2017, and of course was the lead quarterback there for many years beforehand, and an outstanding Hall of Fame career by Anthony Calvillo. So excited to see him back there working with Vernon Adams Jr., who I think is one of the top young quarterbacks in the CFL. Excited to see what they can pull off this coming season. Ottawa is much the same as Hamilton in terms of nothing really on field yet to talk about with them, but they do name Sean Burke the new general manager. Spent 15 years with the Ticats. In 2021 was their senior director of player personnel, co-manager of football operations. I think this is an excellent hire by Ottawa. Hamilton has been one of the best teams in the CFL. They've been to the Grey Cup, 4 times, I think, in the last 8 years. They've been tops in the East Division pretty steadily. And Burke has definitely been a part of that. So I'm excited to see what he brings to a rebuilding team here in Ottawa. They also announced the rest of their football operations staff. Assistant General Manager Jeremy Snyder, Pro College Scout Philippe Moreau, Director of Canadian Scouting and Football Analytics, Chad Hudson, and Director of Pro Personnel, Brendan Taman, is coming in to join the Red Blacks. Of course, we've seen him in various stints around the CFL in kind of personnel roles there. Also announcing the departure of the two people who I just mentioned ended up going to Montreal, Jean-Marc Edmé and Pierre-Yves Laverne. That's it for Ottawa. Then we should move over to, we've got 3 teams to go here to recap. The Saskatchewan Roughriders starting off their offseason with a number of depth signings here. Linebacker A.J. Allen, offensive lineman Logan Bandy, defensive lineman Elaine Simonkinda, defensive lineman Nicholas Daly, kicker Henry Nell, defensive back Matt Watson, and wide receiver Jester Way. None of these particularly playing a ton in 2021, depth 4th round, 5th round picks for the most part here. Then a couple more notable moves, extending long snapper Jorgen Hoos, who has spent the last 7 seasons with Saskatchewan and has played 95 career games, or 95 games I think in that time, 14 games in 2021. Keenan LaFrance, backup running back, signs a 2-year contract extension as well. 6 seasons in the CFL. Last year he had 43 rushing yards, 8 catches for 69 yards in 14 games. So nice re-signing there for a good national backup running back option. And then offensive lineman Tommy Champion spent 2020 on the Seattle Seahawks practice roster, played 2 preseason games with them, joins the Riders. Continuing on the offensive line, they extend Nationals Evan Johnson and Logan Ferland. Both played 14 games last season for them. A team that lost so many pieces in the offseason on the offensive line that there were concerns there. But I think both of these guys filled in pretty well in their roles. Johnson played 3 seasons with Ottawa before that. Ferland, it was his rookie season, and played the most snaps of any Rider in 2021, so not a bad rookie year for him. Saskatchewan continuing to lock up some key pieces. Defensive back Nick Marshall was a West All-Star in 2021, 30 tackles, 3 interceptions, a touchdown, and 7 knockdowns. And linebacker Micah Tights, who led the team in defensive tackles with 64, had 7 special teams tackles and 3 sacks as well. The most outstanding Canadian for the Riders in 2021. They continued just yesterday with extending wide receiver Paul McRoberts Jr. Played 1 regular season, 2 playoff games this past year, 10 receptions, 92 yards. And fullback Albert Awachi has played 4 seasons in Saskatchewan, 36 games in that span, 12 games in 2021 for him. Also signing fullback James Tuck, who was just let go by Edmonton, 7 years in the CFL, last 4 with the Elks. Played all 14 games in 2021 and has 72 career games in the CFL. Big piece on special teams, 52 special teams tackles. And a couple forced fumbles in that range for him. A little bit of play on offense as well. And then the last piece of news for the Riders, they have released national wide receiver Braden Lenius to pursue NFL opportunities. He was their 2nd round pick in 2019. There was a lot of hype around him coming into this last year, and I think he delivered pretty well. 37 catches, 471 yards, 4 touchdowns in 14 games this past season. A nice year for him, and best of luck to him as he pursues his shot in the NFL. Moving over to the Toronto Argonauts, they kicked off their offseason by terminating the contract of Vice President of Player Personnel John Murphy, who was, of course, involved in that wild altercation with fans following the East Final. So good on the Argos for terminating his contract based on that. That is unacceptable representation for a team and just unacceptable behavior in general, in my opinion. They then followed up with a couple of re-signings in the next few days. Wide receiver Sam Baker who was a 6th-round pick this past year. Cam Phillips, also a receiver, played 1 game, 2 catches, 20 yards. Defensive back Tavares McFadden, who's been on, kind of on the practice roster. Fullback Joe Carbone, linebacker Tony Jones, who played in the Indoor Football League in 2021. So a couple of pieces there for them. They also ended up extending a couple bigger names here. Defensive lineman Robbie Smith was their first-round pick in 2019. 14 games this year, had 24 defensive tackles, 6 on special teams, 1 sack, and a forced fumble. Offensive lineman Darius Bladek, 10 games this season, played 3 years with Saskatchewan before that. Alex Chevrier, 10 games. He played 4 with Montreal, then 6 with Toronto, and had 2 special teams tackles this year. And then defensive lineman Dwayne Hendricks, 6 games in 2021, 9 defensive tackles, 1 sack. They follow that up same day, also releasing wide receiver Martavis Bryant, who I know there was a lot of hype around him being a big piece of this offense this year, but never got into a game with the Argos, and his stint there has ended. They have extended offensive lineman Shane Richards, was their first overall pick in 2019, played all 14 games this year in his second season. They've signed defensive lineman Alani Pudutau, who spent time with the Atlanta Falcons in 2021, and continuing, especially in the last couple of days, the Argos have been a little bit busy here. Naming Corey Mace the defensive coordinator. He was with Calgary as the defensive line coach between 2016 and 2021. With great things in Calgary for a number of seasons. Very well-deserved promotion, I think, to a defensive coordinator role for him in Toronto. And hey, we know Toronto loves their former Calgary guys, so just add this to the list, I guess. Defensive back Robertson Daniel also getting an extension. Played 8 games with Calgary in 2019, 21 defensive tackles, 6 special teams, and 3 interceptions in those 8 games. Ended up signing with Toronto last offseason, but only got 2 games in with them due to injury, in which he had 5 tackles and an interception. So excited to see hopefully a healthy Robertson Daniel make a bigger impact again in 2022. And then Argos also signing recently let go wide receiver Ernest Edwards from Edmonton. Played 7 games with the Elks in 2021, 168 yards, 1 touchdown, and also did handle return duties for a few games for 299 yards on 30 returns there. So a nice depth wide receiver signing for Ernest Edwards there. And then finally we get to the defending Grey Cup champion Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They kicked off their offseason with some very good news for Bombers fans in the front office, with Danny McManus and Ted Gavaya extending not only for 2022 but for 2023 as well. Of course, both of them assistant general managers. McManus, director of U.S. Scouting. Gavaya, director of player personnel. A lot of speculation that these guys were going to potentially get some of those GM roles maybe in Ottawa or in Edmonton, but they end up sticking around here with Winnipeg, and I know that makes a lot of Bomber fans very happy. And then a lot of quiet, early on this offseason for Winnipeg. They have a lot of work to do to try to bring back as much of the team as they can and stay under the cap. So no real moves at the end of 2021, but starting off the new year with an extension for defensive back Nick Hallett. So a nice depth signing there. And then signing defensive tackle Jake Thomas to a 1-year extension, which I'm so happy about. He is, to me, one of the more underrated players in the CFL. Everybody talks about Willie Jefferson, Jackson Jeffcoat, for example, on that defensive line. Thomas has been such a steady contributor, making the big plays when he needs to, hardly ever misses games, and is back now for a 10th season, the longest standing member of the Bomber team. Excited to see him back for another season. And then rounding out in the past 2 days, a couple big pieces, some of the most notable ones for Winnipeg, getting extensions for 1 year. Offensive lineman Jamarcus Hardrick is now, will be his, I think, 6th season with Winnipeg. He played fantastic ball the past number of years and got an All-Star nomination in 2021. Defensive linemen Willie Jefferson and Jackson Jeffcoat. Those are by far two of the biggest free agent pieces you could lock up here. That defense was absolutely outstanding all season long, and these two were two huge anchors involved in the pass rush for that. Jefferson, back-to-back CFL All-Star nominations, and Jeffcoat getting that nod in 2021. So some big pieces starting to roll in here for Winnipeg, and I think this was a good starting point for them. Obviously, there's got to be a lot more to come still, and they are going to end up losing some guys to NFL opportunities, such as DeAndre Alford, who's been working out with a ton of NFL teams. You're going to lose some guys to free agency. But certainly, these are the good starting points to build your team around to try to get that three-peat, and we'll see how the rest of the offseason follows for them. So that's been the offseason news roundup thus far for basically the past month or so. A flurry of activity. Some teams focusing on the front office more so, while other teams, just trying to lock up a couple of pieces here and there. We will see them more regularly in the next couple of weeks, I'm sure. A lot more signings come in, or a lot more news as teams get ready for that free agency period that starts off on February 8th. Lots more fun content to come here on the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix. Next week, we are going to take a look, I think, at the quarterback position around the league. Which teams have quarterbacks locked in for next year already, who's available as kind of a free agency primer there. Maybe I'll give some predictions here of where I think different quarterbacks are going to end up for this offseason. I think that should be a fun video to go through and discuss that. And then, of course, in 2 weeks, I'll be back again to recap all of the latest CFL news from those 2 weeks, as we keep the regular updates coming. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't. If you have any topics you want me to discuss this offseason, or any questions at all, CFL or CFL fantasy related, put them in the comments section. And or you can tweet them at me at CooperTrooper42 on Twitter. The link is in the description for that. And stay tuned. Another video, like I said, should be out next week, late in the week, probably Friday. I know originally I said Friday for everything. This is technically Saturday. I apologize for that. But we will try to get to the consistent Friday schedule each week going forward here on the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix. Also, make sure you check out, if you want more CFL content, check out my weekly podcast, the Canadian Football Countdown. You can find it on Twitter at CF Countdown Pod. This week, we kicked off our off-season series on that podcast of doing deep dives on each team. I had the great Zach Schnitzer from the Let's Go Bombers podcast on to do an almost 2-hour deep dive into the Bombers championship season, and lots more fun content to come there on that podcast as well, so make sure you check that out. Also, as always, thanks for watching, take care, have a good one, bye.